Welcome to Review the Future, the podcast that takes an in-depth look at the impact of technology on culture.
I'm John Perry.
I'm Ted Cupper.
And today on Review the Future, we are reviewing Season 5, Episode 1 of Black Mirror called Striking Vipers.
Yeah, we are back looking into Black Mirror after a while. There are new ones out, and we watched them, and we're going to talk about them today.
Yeah, so this is an episode that stars two best friends, Danny and Carl, and one of them gets married and leads sort of a idyllic, suburban life with his wife, and one of them remains like a swinging bachelor, but they stay sort of very loosely in touch, like once a year friends. And one of the ways they reconnect is by playing the newest version of a fighting game, which now has moved into the realm of VR. And when we're talking about VR, we're talking about like extremely realistic VR of
right. This is like a electrode on the head style VR that your body goes completely inert and you're fully ensconced in like a hypersensory world.
Yeah, you put a little electrode on your forehead or temple, I guess. And somehow that like completely overrides all your senses and you can feel pain and pleasure. And they end up planning to play this fighting game, but they end up having a relationship instead. And
yeah, they start a sexual relationship at first and then a kind of romance after that inside this sort of Mortal Kombat style fighting game. And eventually it starts to spill out into their lives and become a kind of social problem for them. And that's kind of that's what the story's about, is how they resolve this tension that they are friends in the regular world, but they're lovers in the VR.
And it's
Oh, and it should also be said that one of the friends always plays as a female character. And so they're a hetero couple in VR as well. And they're two male guys who identify straight in the real world.
I was just going to get into that. Yeah, so they're it's an all black cast, which is cool. So both of these guys are black males, but in the game they are very typical fighting game characters that you might see in a game like Tekken or something. One of them is sort of a ripped standard like Asian fighter type guy.
Yes.
And one of them is like a blonde like pixie girl. And so those are their alter egos that they then have their relationship with.
Yes.
So I think, obviously this is one of those stories that we've sometimes complained about in the past, but I was actually fine with it in this case, where they've just changed one thing in the world pretty much and nothing else. Right. I think there was only like one other nod to future technology, which was there was this smart dishwasher. Did you pick up on that?
Yes, the smart dishwasher was a silly gag. Yeah,
it was very weird. I don't know if did it serve a story purpose. Like I'm not even sure why that was there, other than to remind us that hey, it's the future. It would seem like a very weak nod to the fact that other things might be different in the future. But for the most part, this is a world that's just like today, although kind of a utopian today. I mean, we don't, see the whole world as we rarely do in these things. But, certainly the suburban life has this sort of 50s utopian quality to it. It feels like, I mean, the main characters, I think, got a little bit of that suburban ennui and boredom that he's grappling with, but he lives a pretty nice life. They both seem to. But
they definitely don't seem to be poor or anything. They have nice houses and they have these fancy video games and stuff.
Yeah, and technology wise, everything is pretty much the same, except there's this brand new product that is this insane quality VR. So I mean, right away, there's a little bit of an issue here if we're, being sticklers for realism, because if you had this technology, the entire world should be affected by it, right? It shouldn't just be this one game. The wife should be using it, you would think.
I think there are other games available for it, but yeah, it definitely seemed like only these guys were using it out of their friend group, which I didn't, that struck me as a little weird. I didn't think that was right, because it's, everybody obviously has access to gaming now, and this stuff is presented as if it's very much the same as just like a later version of Xbox or something, right? It has the big controller. the software looks similar to like genres of games you've seen before. So it definitely felt like just like a next gen system. But there was no other, you didn't see that elsewhere in the story.
Right, and I guess that's what I'm saying is that's the sort of cultural niche it fit into is as if it was a new video game system, and of course only video game enthusiasts would maybe know about it. But the quality of VR is such that this would change the world, right? This would not just affect the world of video games. Like this would be monumentally world-changing technology to have this level and quality of VR.
Yeah, and especially at the price point it would have to be included in a video game system, right? I mean, those aren't the most expensive things. So, like this would be everywhere. It would be instead of all kinds of interactions with computers could be through this body jacking or whatever that they're doing, or they're like completely replacing all of your sensory inputs.
I mean, it could be used for work. It could be used for socializing. It could be used for all manner of things that aren't video games, or for art, etc. And so, I don't want to belabor this point too much because it's sort of not what the story is ultimately about. But I like to bring it up now and then because I do think it would be possible to write the same story, hit the same emotional beats, make the same thematic points, and fix this problem. Like, I don't think it would actually be that hard to think through a little bit more of the consequences of this type of technology and to have signs that other people are using it in this world, right? As opposed to it just being, sort of dropped into the laps of these two characters. Because did you get the impression that the wife could even conceive of what her husband might be doing with it?
No, I mean, the wife's whole experience of life is so different. It's so completely analog. She gets hit on in the bar, and then, there's the whole kind of live role-playing aspect of their relationship, and all of that. It felt, interesting, dramatically interesting, but like things that could be mediated by technology, right? I mean, there are dating apps, for example. People meet people other ways than standing at a bar. I think there was a contrast being made there, and I think oftentimes Black Mirror seems to be making a kind of value judgment, right, about technical things being somehow worse. And I think that judgment's being made there. I think it's like, it's displaying the wife's real life as being somehow better.
Well,
I think.
We'll get to this as we get more into the story, but I actually, this particular episode did not bother me in that same way as others have in the past. Like, I didn't feel like this was as scoldy about technology.
Well, I agree with that, actually, and I think the ending is the reason why. But there are moments in the middle when I did feel it still making some of those similar judgments.
Now, something positive I can say about it is that the style, this is a well-done fake video game. And both, they actually show the 2D traditional version of it first before the VR.
That's right. In the kid, they're playing it in the past, and then it shoots forward to like a newer version of the game, right?
Yeah, and it feels like very well modeled on real video games. Like it gets all the tropes right and the look right. And I forget like what were the characters' names were Lance and Roxette, and they look like real characters. Like I don't know. I think this is generally better these days, but for much of my life, I've seen a lot of really bad fake video games on screen that have.
Yeah, I think we've finally gotten to the time in history when the people animating this stuff all grew up with video games, all of them.
Right, so they know what looks convincing.
Know about them. Yeah,
yeah, and I think that is definitely points for this, and it was very fun to see it embodied. Like in the VR, and they got some pretty cool locations to shoot at. I mean, that's like a big part of these games is you can pick the stage that you have your fight at, and that becomes like part of it because like they can choose like where do we want to have sex today, basically. Like, do we want to?
Right. Yeah. Well, it was funny that the sort of vaguely Asian, very beautiful sets that they had that look like the kind of sets you would see in Tekken or Mortal Kombat or something are also weirdly sexy at the right angle. right? They're like kind of romantic or something, and that worked really well for the story. You know, I thought that was really cool.
No, I think it kind of highlights the sort of like sexual overtones that are already running through these games, right? With these like ripped and like really fit characters, like in these sort of like romantic,
and very revealing clothes
backdrops,
and
like
everything.
world crossing backdrops.
Yeah.
Now I do. I wanted to bring up something somewhat related to the point earlier about this like being like a future video game, right? Because this is a prediction that you see all the time, which is like, okay, so clearly this is where video games are going, right? They're just going to get like more and more realistic until they literally are real life, right? And there has been some pushback against that. Sort of like a games professor and like designer and thinker that I particularly like, Frank Lance, has a talk on what he calls the immersive fallacy, which is basically pushing back against the idea that this is sort of the end result of progress in video games, that like, you know, trying to imitate the real world is even desirable or possible. And I tend to agree with that. Like I tend to think like, you know, there's a certain like part of what's interesting about games usually is the ways in which they differ from reality in very specific ways. And it's like once you remake, you know, this virtual space, right? Well, then you still have to design a game in it. And what was weird is that this game here, it has like, it apparently allows you to do everything. Like it simulates genitals, right? It simulates pleasure. That's not even the intent of the game. So they basically have a like full scale reality simulator. And what they've done with it is make a fighting game, but there's like no sense that there's any like fighting game mechanics or restrictions or rules in it at all. Like again, if I were to...
Well, there's some mechanics because there's a little bit of them doing like special moves, right?
Right.
So that's somehow, I don't know, it's not super, it's a bit vague, but it is somewhat mechanics. But yeah, I agree with you. I think they justify it in story by it's like a sequel to a long-running series of games, why it's such an unoriginal design for a game. That part of it I went with, like, it looks like classic games, and they have made those classic games for multiple platforms now, and they do keep making them sort of more realistic without changing the basic structure of them. So I'm kind of on board with, you know, obviously the writers of the show are not game designers, so I'm kind of on board with them just like hand-waving past that. But it is very strange. I mean, it is not at all realistic. I went with it for the sake of the story, and I want to say I did like this episode, by the way, but because I'm complaining about it a lot. But it is strange. I mean, it is definitely strange that they allow you to have sex in this game that presumably kids are buying and stuff, right? I mean, if we think about this as being a mass product that's not just in the hands of these two guys, this quickly becomes problematic, I think.
Yeah. No, there were 2 points I was making, and one you just mentioned, which is like, why are these features even in there, right? And if these features are possible, then again, this should be, you know, affecting all aspects of the world and not just this one video game. But the second thing is, again, if I were to rewrite this episode and still try to hit all the emotional beats, but make the technology a little more rigorous and interesting. Yeah. In addition to having like VR be a pervasive part of this world that has already changed things, I would make it so that they were using the game clearly in an unintended way, and they were sort of having sex through the mechanics of fighting.
Yeah, I was thinking, why aren't they hacking it to make this work? Because I would believe that somebody hacked it and just distributed a little mod that you could load up, and then, you know, and then all the stuff worked. I think I would buy that. But I feel like the way that things like this happen these days is...
Well, and I don't mean hacking it. Sure, modding it or hacking it. I would include that in what I'm saying, but I'm also just saying literally using the mechanics as they are for like reusing them in a different way for like romance and sex. Like, why aren't they like having like shooting like orgasmic fireballs at each other and doing like, you know, crazy like roundhouse I don't know. I feel like there's something sort of
roundhouse what, John?
I don't know. Like they're flying like in midair and they're doing like backflips like while having sex or something. Like I I don't know, like,
yeah, they should definitely be, projectile ejaculating and stuff like that.
well, or it could just be
but-
like a purely, a sadomasochistic relationship where one of them just likes being punched, right? Because that is the verb of the game, is you can punch and kick.
Right.
So
Right.
I don't know. I just wish it played with that a little more.
Right, and then they're sort of they're using the pain response that's built into the game in that case.
Right, but it's erotic for one of them.
But it's
or for both
pleasurable
of
for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that idea. If you were pitching that, I'd say I like that one. I don't know. It's, I can see why they didn't do that for the story, because it maybe makes it more complicated than they wanted to make it. But I agree that in general, this all seems a little bit magical. The way it plays out is a little bit like these are the only two guys in the world that have this, and they were sort of secretly given it or something, which I think serves the story they want to tell, which is about this sort of secret growing relationship, but doesn't seem like the way it would ever actually happen if this technology were to come out. It would be a mass product.
Yeah, and something more positive, though, that I want to talk about is really probably, we should at this point maybe just talk about the core concept, right? Which is like all of this like weird stage setting is there to get us to this like fun idea where they are having this like weird hetero relationship via these avatars while being two straight men, right? I mean, that's what's super interesting about this, I think.
Well, and it starts to have consequences in their life. Like the husband stops being able to have sex with his wife, right? And the friend who's single like loses interest in his sexual partner.
Right. And but what I like about this especially is that it very nicely doesn't fall into like standard boundaries. It in some ways it reminds me of Autonomous and the way that dealt with its robot that was sort of genderless, right? But was like had gender applied to it. Right. So it's sort of like weird, like to think about this relationship. It doesn't really fit into being like a heterosexual or a homosexual relationship. Like it sort of defies those definitions, which I think is cool.
Right. Yeah. And it confuses them because they get so confused about what their orientation is that they feel like they have to physically test out, right, their own compatibility by kissing each other, right?
Yeah, I thought that was a great scene, and one of them was like, "Okay, we gotta try kissing in real life and see if we like it." And it turns out they didn't like it, which I thought was cool and believable. But then I also liked that one of them was like, "Yeah, but I still like the VR thing, so so what, right? Let's keep doing it."
Right. Right. Well, and can we spoil the end now? Is it time, or do we have to wait?
Oh no, go ahead.
All right, so we're spoiling the end now, so turn this off if you don't want to hear it. Go watch it. But I really like this. The way that they end up resolving it is that they realize that they can continue to do this, but they have to be honest with the people in their lives. And the husband ends up like opening his relationship with his wife. So she goes out to the bar to like get hit on by somebody and leaves her wedding ring at home. And that's something we've seen earlier in the story that she found exciting. And he goes on to his video game and fucks his friend. And it's presented as if they are happy. They, we see them later on and they have more kids, right? And it's sort of solved their relationship problems and everybody's getting along.
Yeah, it's like a nice, mature, adult ending. That's like doesn't totally demonize the tech, right? And allows
or the people. It allows everybody to kind of get what they want once they stop hiding secrets from each other and being honest. Which is kind of I think it's sort of the moral of it or something.
Yeah, no, I mean that's I love the ending, and like again, if I was rewriting it, I'd 100% keep every part of that. Like again, the actual story beats here I think are really really solid. But I like what this suggests too about, again, in terms of speculation, the kinds of relationships that are going to be possible, through this kind of digital mediation. Right. I mean, there's some of this today, and there's some other fiction about this where it's mostly like, oh, you didn't know you were, chatting with a, 53-year-old, obese man or whatever.
Right. Well, that's like the rug pull in Ready Player One, right? You're like, oh, this character you thought was a male was actually a lesbian woman or something, right?
Yeah.
But,
so there's a little bit of that that's already exist in that world to some degree. Although, again, anonymity has so much died on the internet in so many places that maybe that promise isn't there as much as it used to be. But yeah, you can't really embody things that easily. I mean, again, there are obviously like virtual worlds that exist. You've got your various MMOs and things like that. But to have it on this scale and to be able to like emulate the pleasure sensations, I don't know. I just think it's really fascinating. It's just another thing that complicates sexuality for people and makes it harder to put into boxes. Right.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It erodes the labels, which I think is super interesting. And that's what the story does best, I think, is that these guys, and they're not presented as being particularly like homophobic or anything. They're just people who are just not gay, but they are very thrown by trying to figure out what their relationship means, since they are sort of wearing these different bodies when they feel this different way. And I think embodiment is a big part of sexuality, right? I mean, part of it's about your partner and what you desire, and then part of it's about you and how you view yourself. And that's what's going to change as this stuff gets better and more pervasive. So I think there will be new categories of sexuality that we will have to make up, basically, to describe the ways that people deal with that, which I think will be multivarious and surprising.
The other aspect of this that I thought was an interesting choice is that they mention one of the characters actually tries. So Danny, the main character who's got the wife and has got the family and everything, tries to break it off, right? And then the one that's more of a bachelor, is really hurting for lack of this relationship in their life. So they try to, basically recreate this with other people online, with other users, right? And it's the same fighting game setting. It's the same characters, but it's not the same, right? Because the puppeteer that controls the avatar really does matter. So I think that's really interesting as well. So it's like what they're in love with is neither the avatar nor the person. It's like the particular person transmuted through the avatar into this third thing.
Right. It reminds me of Being John Malkovich, where, she only loves him when he's riding Malkovich, she doesn't love Malkovich and she doesn't love John Cusack. But when John Cusack is controlling Malkovich because he is a master puppeteer, right? Then Catherine Keener loves him,
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting. It's just an interesting sort of theory about what love is, to what extent it's about the Descartesian binary, the body or the mind. And what's cool about this VR tech is that it meaningfully separates those things so that you can evaluate them individually.
Compare any body with any mind.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense that your friend in a body that you find hot suddenly becomes somebody you want to be in a romantic relationship with, right?
Sure.
I mean, there's some sense to that, and there's also some sense to the idea that you might, like sex with women when you're wearing your male body, but then when you wear your female body, you might like sex with men, right? I mean, you might not, of course, but there's some sense to that. You can understand it.
Yeah, well, and I think to some extent this is also a story about just male bonding and right, and whether or not there's some homoerotic overtones already that exist.
Right, to just men playing video games together in general there's maybe some erotic circle jerk type element to it that's being analogized here for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. That's not to me the most interesting part of the story, but I think that's definitely in the background.
Definitely.
So when I was perusing the Wikipedia article for this briefly, just because I wanted to read the summary again, This popped out at me and seemed to me like I did not agree with this. It says executive producer Annabelle Jones, so she should know what she's talking about, stated that the episode asks, when does porn become so sophisticated that it's actually cheating and not just distraction? And I think we can talk about this question. To me, that was not the most important theme of the episode that I took, but it is a different discussion than the one we've been having so far.
Yeah, that is interesting. It didn't ever feel like cheating to me, either in terms of what my own judgment of it or in terms of the character's judgment of it.
Well, he was lying to the wife.
He was lying to the wife. That was what I was just going to say. And I do think the story does do something interesting about things don't get better for him until he stops lying to the wife. And I love the way they played that too. He like opens his mouth to tell her the truth, and then they just, they cut away and they show it's a long time later when he comes back. And I thought that was cool. I don't know. I don't. It's interesting if they conceived of it that way, then I think they got lucky. But because that's not as interesting as what they ended up with, I don't think.
I think that's not the kinds of things that like Charlie Brooker was actually saying about it. That's why I thought maybe that like this producer was just kind of riffing. But that may have been like a conversation they had at some point, right? But it doesn't seem like that's the central point of it, and it doesn't really feel like it's about porn in any meaningful way. There is a point in the story where the character says, I think basically because the husband's trying to break it off because he feels bad about lying to his wife and not being able to sleep with her, and the friend says, well, it's not cheating, it's basically like porn, right? I mean, that line is, I guess that's true, although I would say it's like definitionally almost not porn, because like another person is so intimately involved. So in that sense, it's if your partner's inclined to think it's cheating, or it's like outside the bounds of what you've agreed upon in the relationship, it's absolutely could be called cheating. But it certainly isn't porn, because like porn to me is inanimate.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's more like cheating, especially because he's lying about it than it is like porn. But it didn't feel like porn to me, particularly because of the game nature of it. The fact that they were misusing this technology on some level, and just the fact that they had this, they were playing the game, I guess, they were doing what they were saying. I don't know. I don't know. It's so strange, because it's so abstract, I guess, it's only happening in their minds. It keeps showing them laying on the couch. They're not even moving, so I don't know. It's all imaginary on some level. I mean, isn't it just the same as fantasy, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, I guess that's an interesting question. But to me, like, your fantasies don't involve actual other people, right? Like, I think,
Well, depends how good you are at fantasizing, I guess.
Well, they don't involve people that I believe to be conscious. I suppose how do I know, right?
Yeah, exactly. You can't be certain.
But anyways, do you have anything else that you want to discuss about this episode? Because those are most of the points I had.
No, I think that you covered everything I thought was interesting about it.
So why don't we give it a grade here?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I think we should.
Because I've been down on Black Mirror lately. I think the last time we talked about Black Mirror, I was pretty negative. But I liked this episode quite a bit. I think, again, because it didn't have this reflexive, like, technology is bad thing or, like, sort of needless cruelty thing that, like, Charlie Brooker so often goes to. And it had...
No, it didn't have any cruelty, I didn't think. And it had basically a happy ending where the technology is not rejected, which I don't think I'd ever seen before in a Black Mirror. That felt like a departure for them.
Well, I think there are other episodes that I'm not sure if you've seen them all yet.
No, I haven't seen everyone in the last
I can think of at least one other episode that has like a very happy ending. So that's not unheard of in the series.
Well, there are several with happy endings that involve getting rid of the tech, but that's different.
No, there's another pro tech sort of like happy ending one I can think of, but I won't give it away. But yeah, I think And it's not that I like it because it has a happy ending. I want to be clear. I like dark stories. This could have ended with them getting a divorce or something, and that would have been potentially a good story if they'd built up to it well.
Right.
It's more just like, if it ended with them getting a divorce, it's not necessarily that the technology is evil, right? Like that's the part that's the simplistic, like all technology is this horrible nightmare thing. That I find distasteful about some of the Black Mirror episodes.
Right, and some of them is the sort of cruelty that I can't figure out who benefits from it, But this one didn't have that, and it actually did make sense why everybody was doing what they were doing. No one seemed evil. Some mistakes were made. It was dramatic. It was interesting, but ultimately it was, yeah. And I think I just like that it had a happy ending because so few Black Mirrors do, not because. Obviously, other things, I don't think that's generally a good, a necessary feature for something to be good. But it was refreshing with this one. And it was also refreshing that it was a story about Black people where their Blackness was totally incidental to the story. It was not, it wasn't ignored, but it also wasn't a story that focused on race, really. It just focused on these characters, and I felt close to them, and I thought that was really well done.
Well, and of course, it's got race changing in it, but it's not even discussed, and I'm totally fine with it not being
even discussed at all. Yeah, that's right. I mean, you barely even notice it, and the characters in the video game world are both like a bit vaguely Asian, right? But it's not clear exactly what race they're even supposed to be. Just that they're not. I mean, they're not Black,
right? So I would give this, like an A-. I mean, I liked it. It's not like I'm only not giving it a straight up A because it's not the most mind-blowingly awesome thing I've ever seen. And the VR tech is like a little bit, we've seen that before, but like what it does with it is cool. I like it.
Yeah. There were times when I thought the characters were taking too long to sort of work through their issue. Like a lot of what they needed to do was just kind of get over themselves. Like everything was kind of fine in their world if they could just be okay with it. And sometimes it felt like it was taking a little long for that. So I'll ding it a little. I agree with your grade. I'll give it an A-. It's not my favorite Black Mirror, but it's my favorite Black Mirror since in the last 2 seasons, which to be fair, I haven't seen all.
Are you willing to say what your favorite Black Mirror is since you mentioned it indirectly?
I will. I mean, I will say it. My favorite Black Mirror is the first Black Mirror, and it's not the most speculative one. My favorite speculation is definitely the Domhnall Gleeson robot one, which is a season 2
I think
episode
that's
1.
my favorite, that one.
And I do like that one very much, but the first one remains the high watermark for me. I mean, that makes me shudder every time I think about it.
I've heard you say this
powerful
before.
piece.
Well, I've heard you say this before. Maybe I need to rewatch that one because I thought it was okay. I only thought, but
it's subjective, but I don't know. I rewatched it recently, and it got me the second time too. I think it's a really good piece. It's not speculative at all. It takes place in the present day, but it's about the world as it is in a way that I think very few things these days are.
Wait, can we talk about the fact for a second? And maybe we've already discussed this on this podcast before, but the fact that Black Mirror so clearly seems to have this formula, right? For every 3 episodes, like each one fits a particular mold, right? And that holds true for this season, right? It's there's always one episode that is like they've changed one technology, but otherwise kept things pretty realistic. That would be this episode, right?
Yep.
There's always one that's more or less set in the present day, but just like really grapples with today's technology in an interesting way. And then there's always one that's like a little bit silly and out there, right? That's like more absurdist, right? Where the technology gets it's surprisingly consistent. It must have been like just part of I've never seen anybody writing about that formula, but it seems like it's too hard to ignore at this point. It seems to happen consistently.
Yeah, I don't know if they do it intentionally, but it does seem like they have done it over and over again. And even in the longer seasons, it seems like they just did it twice.
Exactly. Yeah, the 6 episode seasons are just 2 versions of that like triumvirate of things.
Yeah, it does seem that way. Maybe one day we'll do a little categorization and put them all in their boxes. But I haven't seen every single one, so I'll have to make sure I catch up first.
So coming up next episode, we're going to continue talking about this season of Black Mirror. So now is your warning to go ahead and catch up on that. It's only 2 more episodes, so it shouldn't take you much time.
Yeah, watch those or we're going to spoil them for you.
So until next time,
I'm Ted Cover.
I'm John Perry.
And you've been listening to Review the Future.
To subscribe or leave a comment on this episode, please visit reviewthefuture.com. You can also send emails to feedback@reviewthefuture.com. Thanks for listening.